There are monsters in mythology that exist to be slain, and then there are monsters that exist to reveal something. The Chimera was one of them. In Greek mythology, the Chimera is described as a monstrous fusion, a creature composed of contradictions. It carries the body of a lion, a goat rising from its back, and a serpent forming its tail, and from its mouth it breathes fire. It devastates the land of Lycia, not through brute strength alone, but through its very nature, because the Chimera is not one creature, it is many, bound together without harmony. To confront it, the hero Bellerophon is sent on what appears to be an impossible task. But Bellerophon does not meet the Chimera on equal ground. He rises above it. With the aid of Pegasus, the winged horse, he gains a vantage point the creature cannot reach. And from this elevated perspective, he attacks. In the most well-known version of the myth, Bellerophon places a piece of lead upon his spear. When the Chimera breathes fire, the heat melts the lead, which flows into the creature's throat, destroying it from within. And so, the monster is defeated. But the myth does not end in victory. Because after defeating the Chimera, Bellerophon attempts to ascend even higher, to Olympus itself, the realm of the gods. But this ascent is not granted. Zeus intervenes. Bellerophon is cast down. And the hero who defeated the monster lives the rest of his life in isolation. So the myth leaves us with a question. If the Chimera truly represented chaos overcome, why does the hero fall? Why does victory lead not to wholeness, but to separation? Perhaps the Chimera was never simply something to be destroyed. Perhaps it was something to be understood, because the creature itself is not random. It is composed, each part distinct, each force powerful, each element real, and yet together they form something unstable. The Chimera is not terrifying because it is monstrous, but because it is made of parts that no longer know how to exist as one. Across Greek mythology, a subtle pattern appears. Heroes do not confront chaos blindly. They meet it from a place of distance, clarity, or elevation. But not all elevation is the same. In many modern retellings, Perseus is shown riding Pegasus as he rescues Andromeda from the sea monster Cetus. But in the original myth, this is not the case. Perseus does not rely on Pegasus, and yet he he is still depicted as attacking from above. So what does this mean? If Perseus rises without Pegasus, then his elevation is not external, it is internal. Before confronting the monster, Perseus had already undergone a transformation. In facing Medusa, he learned something essential. He could not look directly. He had to perceive indirectly. He had to act without becoming what he faced. This was not merely a task. It was a shift in consciousness. He learned to observe without identification, to act without being consumed, to remain aware within danger. And so when he later confronts the monster, he no longer requires an external means of elevation, because he already operates from a higher awareness. Now contrast this with Bellerophon. To face the Chimera, he requires Pegasus, he requires strategy, he requires tools, he rises above the creature, but through something outside himself. Pegasus gives him access to a higher perspective, but it is not yet a state he has embodied. If the Chimera is more than a creature, then its form is not accidental. It is composed of three beings: the lion, the goat, and the serpent. Each one carries its own nature. Each one expresses a different force, and none of them alone are unnatural. The instability of the Chimera does not come from what it is made of, but from the fact that these forces exist without relationship to one another. The lion is the force of power. It represents will, action, identity, the drive to assert and to lead. It is the part of us that says, I am. In balance, the lion becomes courage, steady presence, true leadership. But disconnected from awareness, it becomes domination, control, power without clarity. The goat is the force of desire. It represents appetite, longing, sensation, the need to experience life through the body. It is the part that says, I want. In balance, the goat becomes creativity, expression, embodiment, but without direction. It becomes endless hunger, consumption, escape. And the serpent is the force of instinct, the oldest part. It represents survival, fear, intuition, the deep unconscious memory within us. It whispers, protect yourself. At its highest expression, the serpent becomes wisdom, perception, transformation, but isolated from awareness, it becomes anxiety, defensiveness, fear without understanding. And within this division there is fire. The Chimera breathes fire. not separate from itself, but as the energy that animates it. This fire fuels our reactions, our desires, our fears. Without awareness, it moves outward as conflict, projection, destruction. But the fire itself is not evil, it is simply uncontained. In the myth, Bellerophon places lead upon his spear and directs it into the Chimera's throat, the place from which the fire is expressed. When the creature breathes, the lead melts. What was once solid becomes fluid. What was once fixed begins to transform. In alchemy, lead represents the unrefined self, the dense parts within us, the shadow, the unresolved, the raw material from which transformation begins. And so symbolically, the myth reveals something profound. The fire activates transformation within the densest parts of the self. But in the myth, this transformation is forced, abrupt, unintegrated. The system collapses instead of evolving. And here, the myth turns toward us, because the human being is not unlike lead, dense, grounded, shaped by time and experience. And within us, there is also fire, the same fire that animates, drives, creates. Like the Chimera, we can express this fire unconsciously, outward, reactive, fragmented, or we can learn to hold it, to allow it to illuminate, refine, and transform us from within. The fire was never meant to destroy the self, only to reveal what within it is ready to change. By the end of the myth, the Chimera is gone. The hero has risen, fought, overcome, and yet something remains unresolved, because what was faced externally was never fully met within. The Chimera is not something outside us. It is the expression of power without balance, desire without direction, instinct without awareness. To destroy it is not to resolve it, only to silence its outer form. Integration asks for something different, not removal, not suppression, but relationship. The lion becomes grounded power. The goat becomes aligned desire. The serpent becomes living wisdom. And when these forces begin moving together, the inner conflict dissolves, not because one force wins, but because none of them are excluded. And the fire remains, but now it becomes steady instead of reactive, creative instead of destructive, illuminating instead of overwhelming. At this point, something else disappears, the need to rise above oneself, because there is nothing left to escape. What was once accessed from above is now lived from within. We no longer speak of heroes and monsters, and yet the pattern remains. Bellerophon appears today in another form, as the teacher, the guide, the voice of authority, someone who has touched a higher perspective but has not fully integrated it. The modern world is filled with quick awakenings, instant transformation, techniques that elevate but do not integrate. These are all forms of Pegasus. They lift, they reveal, but they do not by themselves transform the structure of the self. And this is where the distortion begins. The experience of elevation becomes identity. I understand. I have seen more. I am above. And from there, the individual begins to lead. But the myth reminds us, what is borrowed cannot be sustained, and what is not integrated will eventually reveal itself. Integration is not a moment of victory. It is a relationship lived daily. There is no shortcut, no technique, no external force that can replace the work of awareness, honesty, and inner alignment. The myths never end where we think they do. Beneath the monsters and battles, they are asking something far more intimate. Can you recognize these forces within yourself and bring them into harmony? The Chimera was never the enemy. It was the fire within us, divided against itself, and the journey was never to conquer it, but to become whole enough to hold it. If this path resonated with you, there are more journeys waiting within the labyrinth. More myths, more symbols, more forgotten realms waiting to be remembered. Continue the journey.